Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen across our beautiful country of Canada, our friends around the world in the known and unknown universe. Welcome back to your favorite angry Canadian on the 6th day of February 2024. Oh man, I keep saying the news is hard to keep up with, and boy, do I have big breaking news. Not only me, it's a big breaking news all over, and this is a story that'll stay on top, at least in the social media world. It's quite possible that mainstream media will completely avoid it. It's quite possible that politicians will condemn it, but it's also quite possible that ordinary citizens will clamor to get everything they can from Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is in Russia. He's in Moscow. He is there to have an interview with Vladimir Putin. Now, you remember what happened when he came to Canada. The media, well, how dare Daniel Smith, talk with him, be on the same stage. Oh, our Canada's going to collapse. And the politicians in Ottawa, they had a complete meltdown. I'm pretty sure after this interview in Russia of Vladimir Putin, by the most watched journalist in probably the world, Tucker Carlson, it'll be an eye-opener. Thank you, Tucker.
Tucker Carlson is in Moscow. Yeah, that's right. Russia. That's right. He's in Russia. And the corrupt U.S. Political class is shaking in its boots over this story. They clearly don't want him to expose their lies about the war in Ukraine or sanctions against Russia or any of the other propaganda that has been spoon-fed to you over the past few years about Russia.
We're in Moscow tonight. We're here to interview the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. We'll be doing that soon. There are risks to conducting an interview like this, obviously, so we thought about it carefully over many months. Here's why we're doing it. First, because it's our job. We're in journalism. Our duty is to inform people. 2 years into a war that's reshaping the entire world, most Americans are not informed. They have no real idea what's happening in this region, here in Russia or 600 miles away in Ukraine. But they should know. They're paying for much of it in ways they might not fully yet perceive. The war in Ukraine is a human disaster. It's left hundreds of thousands of people dead, an entire generation of young Ukrainians, and it's depopulated the largest country in Europe. But the long-term effects are even more profound. This war has utterly reshaped the global military and trade alliances, and the sanctions that followed have as well. And in total, they have upended the world economy. The post-World War II economic order, the system that guaranteed prosperity in the West for more than 80 years, is coming apart very fast, and along with it, the dominance of the US dollar. These are not small changes. They are history-altering developments. They will define the lives of our grandchildren. Most of the world understands this perfectly well. They can see it. Ask anyone in Asia or the Middle East what the future looks like. And yet the populations of the English-speaking countries seem mostly unaware. They think that as nothing has really changed. And they think that because no one has told them the truth. Their media outlets are corrupt. They lie to their readers and viewers. And they do that mostly by omission. For example, since the day the war in Ukraine began, American media outlets have spoken to scores of people from Ukraine, and they have done scores of interviews with Ukrainian President Zelensky. We ourselves have put in a request for an interview with Zelensky, and we hope he accepts. But the interviews he's already done in the United States are not traditional interviews. They are fawning pep sessions specifically designed to amplify Zelensky's demand that the U.S. enter more deeply into a war in Eastern Europe and pay for it. That is not journalism. It is government propaganda. Propaganda of the ugliest kind, the kind that kills people. At the same time, our politicians and media outlets have been doing this, promoting a foreign leader like he's a new consumer brand. Not a single Western journalist has bothered to interview the president of the other country involved in this conflict, Vladimir Putin. Most Americans have no idea why Putin invaded Ukraine or what his goals are now. They've never heard his voice. That's wrong. Americans have a right to know all they can about a war they're implicated in, and we have the right to tell them about it because we are Americans too. Freedom of speech is our birthright. We were born with the right to say what we believe. That right cannot be taken away no matter who is in the White House. But they're trying anyway. Almost 3 years ago, the Biden administration illegally spied on our text messages and then leaked the contents to their servants in the news media. They did this in order to stop a Putin interview that we were planning. Last month, we're pretty certain they did exactly the same thing once again, but this time we came to Moscow anyway. We are not here because we love Vladimir Putin. We are here because we love the United States, and we want it to remain prosperous and free. We paid for this trip ourselves. We took no money from any government or group, nor are we charging people to see the interview. It is not behind a paywall. Anyone can watch the entire thing, shot live to tape and unedited, on our website, tuckercarlson.com. Elon Musk, to his great credit, has promised not to suppress or block this interview once we post it on his platform, X, and we're grateful for that. Western governments, by contrast, will certainly do their best to censor this video on other less principled platforms because that's what they do. They are afraid of information they can't control. But you have no reason to be afraid of it. We are not encouraging you to agree with what Putin may say in this interview, but we are urging you to watch it. You should know as much as you can. And then, like a free citizen and not a slave, you can decide for yourself. Thanks.
Really ironic how it seems to be comedians throughout our Western history or past have been the ones that have talked truth to power, whereas the media is just supporting whatever side they're told to support. We got Russell Brand in the UK, and boy, he's been hammered bad. We got Jimmy Dore in America, and a whole bunch of others that are talking the truth. And this is really gotta be pissing off the mainstream news, because they're being slammed from all sides. Social media to be one.
So after Trump won the Iowa caucus, Rachel Maddow at MSNBC said this.
Let me just interject. I'm sorry, I just have to do a little bit of business just for a second. At this point in the evening, the projected winner of the Iowa caucuses has just started giving his victory speech. We will keep an eye on that as it happens. We will let you know if there's any news made in that speech, if there's anything noteworthy, something substantive and important. The reason I'm saying this is, of course, there is a reason that we and other news organizations have generally stopped giving an unfiltered live platform to remarks by former President Trump. It is not out of spite. It is not a decision that we relish. It is a decision that we regularly revisit. And honestly, earnestly, it is not an easy decision, but there is a cost to us as a news organization of knowingly broadcasting untrue things.
Boy. It's so refreshing to be gaslit by a lesbian, isn't it? She gives a bad name to people with a high blink rate, doesn't she? I think, her eyelashes are less fake than she is, okay? So there's a cost, she says, to them airing untrue things. Well, here's an untrue thing she never apologized for.
It means instead of the virus being able to hop from person to person to person to person, spreading and spreading, sickening some of them, but not all of them, and the ones that it doesn't sicken don't know they have it, and then they give it to even more people because they didn't recognize they were. Right? Instead of the virus being able to hop from person to person to person, potentially mutating and becoming more virulent and drug resistant along the way, now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus does not infect them, the virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else. It cannot use a vaccinated person as a host to go get more people. That means the vaccines will get us to the end of this.
So everything she said was complete fucking bullshit lie. And she's pretending that this is an actual vaccine, the way vaccines used to work. Yeah, that's the way they used to work, but I guess she didn't get the memo that they actually had to rewrite the definition of what a vaccine is, because it doesn't do any of the things she just claimed it did on MSNBC. And by the way, there was no cost for her to say that. There's no cost for her to say untrue things like that at the top of her lungs into a camera. There's no cost. She never had to pay a price, and she's never ever apologized for it. In fact, they won't even admit that that's the case. And again, it's fun to be gaslit by a lesbian because gay people are moral and they would never lie to us. By the way, did Russia not, there she is. Did Russia not just help elect Donald Trump? Did they pick the cabinet? So there is no cost. I mean, the idea that she's pretending that somehow they're virtuous, but there's people who watch her show, they think that. There's people who watch their show and think that, well, Rachel Maddow's telling us, my former roommate at his Christmas party said, Rachel Maddow's, and she is, what was the word he used, Steph? She is impeccable. That's what he said. She's beyond reproach. That's what he said. And I was like, oh my God. I go, is there anything that you hear on MSNBC that you don't believe? Is there anything? And he didn't, there's nothing, there wasn't anything. He was like, I'm gonna stop talking now.
It turns out the same people that like Rachel Maddow, they love Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
They go to the same hairstylist.
So, Matt Orfalea, who I'll take credit for discovering. I discovered him before anybody else, and he used to make videos for my show, so everybody, anyway. And then fucking Matt Taibbi stole him from me, and now he's too busy to do shit for me anymore. I'm like, hey, can you do me? Oh, Jimmy, I'm really booked up doing stuff for Matt Taibbi. Okay. So Matt Orfalea put this together. And if you think there's a cost for MSNBC and Rachel Maddow for saying untrue things on their show, let me disabuse you of that idea right now.
McCarthy publicly charges that the United States is invested with
Foreign forces at work in our politics.
He says that he has a list of
600 Twitter accounts that appear to be linked to the Russian government.
That's a lie.
These Kremlin-linked accounts, these Kremlin-linked accounts, these Kremlin-linked accounts, Russian-linked accounts, Kremlin-linked accounts, a foreign influence, Kremlin-oriented Twitter accounts, Kremlin-linked Twitter accounts, Russian-linked Twitter accounts, impersonating Americans.
They are every day playing on social media. There's a website called Hamilton 68 that measures it.
This Russian influence tracker on Twitter.
The Russian dashboard is a real-time dashboard of Russian influence using the Russian networks that we monitor.
Accounts allegedly linked to bots and trolls that are linked to Russia.
Linked accounts and bots according to a Russian tracker.
To track what Russian bots are doing. Kremlin-linked accounts, Kremlin efforts, Kremlin attacks.
The dashboard, Hamilton 68, determined that Russia was in the Alabama election. We know that the Russians were focused on this. These forensic sites show what the Russians are doing to us.
Interference from Russians.
These Russian intrusions.
Russian-influenced Twitter accounts.
With Russia were interfering.
the impact of McCarthyism is felt across the United States.
The Russian bot pose a grave threat to democracy.
Now this data comes from Hamilton 68. That's a web dashboard, and it tracks around 600 Russia-linked accounts, and it doesn't provide the names of those accounts.
I will not give those names.
Because if it did, the Russians could simply change them.
What does he say? So this goes on for 11 minutes, this video, of this lie after untrue thing after untrue thing. And they were basing this all on that Hamilton 68 or whatever. It was all made up, all pretend. Oh, we can't tell you the names of the Twitter accounts and social media accounts that are backed by Russia, because then they would just, that's exactly what McCarthy said. I have the names, but I have a secret list. And they did the same goddamn thing. And that's what Matt Orfalea so brilliantly is pointing out here in this video. I'll play a little bit more if I have some.
Russian bots obviously connected with Russian intel agencies getting involved in a school shooting.
What the hell is he talking about?
The horrendous shooting at the high school in Florida. Russia played a role.
Bots that spread false information on Twitter when it comes to the shooting in Parkland, Florida.
Russian social media bots seized on the Florida shooting. Russian trolls tweeting about Parkland. Russian bot arm.
So they just keep going. So They've been lying to you at the top of their lungs since at least 2016 and way before that too. And it was Russiagate, which was a deep state hoax that was pulled off in conjunction with the corporate-owned media and the Democratic Party and the Hillary campaign, which funded the goddamn dossier, for fuck's sake. They lied about funding it for an entire year. Who did they lie to about that? To the FBI, which I don't know why they had to, because the FBI was in on the whole fucking Russiagate thing in the first place. But nobody's ever been made, there's no price for any of these lies. There's no comeuppance, there's no mea culpa, there's nobody there to hold them accountable except places like the Jimmy Dore Show and the Gray Zone. And that's about it. Those are the only places holding these people to account. And what do? They call us conspiracy theorists, even though the biggest conspiracy of my life was the dumbest conspiracy, was that Donald Trump was working with Russia to win the election and hurt our country. It was the dumbest fucking, it was easily disprovable. I disproved that Russia hacked the DNC server in 2016. I brought on Bill Binney, who was the top code breaker from the NSA for decades, and then the FBI tried to imprison him, but Bill Binney's smarter than the FBI, and he outsmarted them, so they couldn't put him in prison. And I brought him on the show, and he showed forensically how Russia could not have hacked the DNC server. No one else re-reported that. Isn't that amazing? They didn't re-report any of that? Nobody re-reported any of that. And so, yeah, it's weird that a dumb well, I'm not a pothead anymore, but I used to be. Pothead comedian could get the Russiagate right and debunk it from day one. Could get the Syrian gas attacks, which was a false flag bullshit. That whole war was bullshit, and get that right. Libya, Syria, Ukraine, Russiagate. What else? COVID, the vax, lockdowns, masks, every fucking thing. It's not hard if I can do it. So they're not doing it because they're on purpose. They're not doing it because they're afraid, scared little cowards who don't want to actually risk their careers, their jobs, their reputation, or like Jon Stewart doesn't want to risk being invited to parties. He can't fucking have that happen anymore. Once he told the truth about where the Wuhan virus actually came from, he was banned from polite society, and he's coming back. By the way, he's coming back on the Daily Show. I can't wait to see all the shit he doesn't talk about. I think he's coming back just to let us know how bad Trump is. That's all this is. He wants to get in on some of that Trump cash and Trump bashing, and he can't leave it all up to Noah and Jimmy Kimmel, so he's got to get in there and do some of it. Anyway, anything else you'd like to add? Go ahead.
And the meltdown is starting. Oh man, I tell you, this is going to be the biggest thing for mainstream fake lying piece of crap media to chomp on for I don't even know how long. I mean, I'm sure tonight Rachel Madcow will be on to tell you how awful and how Tucker, whatever, it's all bullshit. But this is what they're doing.
There was a point in time, not that long ago, when it was a basic principle of the Republican Party to consider Vladimir Putin a major threat to the United States. I mean, I remember so clearly watching my former boss, Barack Obama, debate Mitt Romney back in 2012, and Romney saying basically exactly that.
Russia, I indicated, is a geopolitical foe. I'm not going to wear rose-colored glasses when it comes to Russia or Mr. Putin.
Now, I'm sure I personally attacked Mitt Romney at the time. I probably did. And I don't typically side with him over Barack Obama. But I mean, it sure feels like he had a point there. Putin's regime was a threat to our interests. And that threat has actually only grown worse since Romney made those comments in 2012. Remember, back in 2014, Putin invaded Ukraine and seized the Crimean Peninsula. And at that time, the Republican line was to hammer President Obama for not doing enough, in their view, to deter and punish Putin. At the time, Republican Congressman Mike Turner said, quote, "This is a president that is retracting the U.S. policy at a time when obviously Russia sees an opportunity." Senator Lindsey Graham urged President Obama to, quote, "suspend Russian membership in the G8 and the G20 at least for a year and for every day they stay in Crimea. Add to the suspension." And Senator Ted Cruz said that Putin, quote, "has nothing to fear from the United States, and that is why he's proceeding with impunity." That rhetoric was all pretty tough on Russia, and for good reason. They invaded a sovereign country and stole their land. But beginning in 2016, that hardline Republican position toward Russia began to kind of soften. There was, of course, the Donald Trump of it all. That was a big factor. The Republican presidential candidate obviously had a very different view of Vladimir Putin than many in his party. We all know that. History tells us that. You may remember that the Trump campaign actually changed the Republican Party platform on Ukraine's defense in 2016. It went from calling on the U.S. to provide Ukraine lethal defensive weapons, similar to what a lot of those members had called for, to the very much more benign phrase, appropriate assistance. And once Trump took office, he continued to openly praise and defend Vladimir Putin. There was a whole laundry list of things he said, a habit he hasn't exactly been able to break. But during Trump's tenure, there was another very loud and influential right-wing voice that sided with Putin over and over and over again.
Why do I care what's going on in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia? And I'm serious. Like, why do I care?
I'll tell you why.
And why shouldn't I root for Russia,
Because
which I am? Could any of these people actually tell you why Vladimir Putin is so bad? Why is he so bad? He's bad! I think we should probably take the side of Russia if we have to choose between Russia and Ukraine. That is my view. It might be worth asking yourself, since it is getting pretty serious, what is this really about? Why do I hate Putin so much? Has Putin ever called me a racist? Has he threatened to get me fired for disagreeing with him? So why does permanent Washington hate him so much? If you've been watching the news, you know that Putin is having a border dispute with a nation called Ukraine.
Border dispute is certainly one way to characterize a major military invasion. Of course, Carlson is now just another far-right conspiracy peddler with a show on the internet who's no longer on Fox, as we all know. And he's apparently been spending the last few days in Moscow for some reason. Who knows? We don't know why. He has to stay relevant somehow, so I guess we'll learn in the coming days. Maybe. But his position on Putin and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, one that would have been antithetical to Republican orthodoxy less than a decade ago, has apparently become now the majority view within the party. Because Republicans in Congress have been delaying additional aid to Ukraine since October. Today, House Republican leadership rejected any possibility of voting for the Senate's bipartisan compromise bill that would have provided funding for Ukraine, Israel, and the U.S. border. A package that, by the way, as a reminder, they themselves had demanded. And as National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said back in December, a vote against funding for Ukraine is a vote to help Putin.
Are you saying that any member of Congress who votes against aid to Ukraine is voting for Putin?
I believe that any member of Congress who does not support funding for Ukraine is voting for an outcome that will make it easier for Putin to prevail. That is, a vote against supporting Ukraine is a vote to improve Putin's strategic position. That's just an inescapable reality.
That's just an inescapable reality. And unfortunately, it's the reality we're currently living in.
What do you think about Tucker Carlson heading off to Russia to talk with Vladimir Putin? My opinion, I like it. I like Tucker. I think he's amazing. And I like Putin. I think he's one of the best heads of state out there who is looking after the interest of his country and his people. He's not backing down. Trudeau, what does he do? He looks after the World Economic Forum and whatever Uncle Sam tells him.
We were told at the beginning that our support would allow Ukraine to beat Russia and keep Russia from invading the rest of Europe or something. Well, almost 2 years in, none of that has turned out to be true. Ukraine is not going to beat Russia. The only person who's been beaten in this is the United States. The U.S. is weaker, measurably weaker, because of our support for Ukraine in this war. That's just true. The verdict is in. And honest, rational people admit that, no matter what their previous position. But the Biden administration cannot admit that, and neither can the U.S. Congress. And so now there is, believe it or not, an effort in progress to get the U.S. government to send another $60-odd billion to the oligarchs in Ukraine. So another generation of Ukrainian men, this one probably in their 50s, can die in a pointless war on the battlefield. They're not going to win, but the U.S. Congress would like to keep this conflict going anyway. So you'd think someone would stand up and say, this is awful, but almost nobody has. Why? Because the position of the administration is, if you're not in favor of this, sending another $60 billion to the oligarchs in Ukraine, then you're working for Vladimir Putin. Watch the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, say that out loud.
I want to ask a question about Ukraine. Are you saying that any member of Congress who votes against aid to Ukraine is voting for Putin?
I believe that any member of Congress who does not support funding for Ukraine is voting for an outcome that will make it easier for Putin to prevail. That is, a vote against supporting Ukraine is a vote to improve Putin's strategic position. That's just an inescapable reality. That's not speaking to someone's motive, why they chose to vote against it. That's just speaking to the outcome of their vote. A vote against supplemental funding for Ukraine will hurt Ukraine and help Russia. It will hurt democracy and help dictators.
These people cannot see themselves. A lady in a mask, presumably not on her way to rob a liquor store, but wearing it for health reasons, asked the National Security Advisor about the moral implications of a vote in the Congress. And he says with a straight face, anyone who doesn't support this legislation is helping Putin. It's insanity, but it's intimidated almost the entirety of the U.S. Congress and certainly the Republican leadership, which is foursquare on the side of the Biden administration to continue this tragedy. There are very few members of Congress who dissent, and one of them who has done so consistently and in the most articulate possible way and on principle has been Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky, who we wanted to talk to about this and also to thank for his bravery and steadfastness. Congressman, thank you so much for coming on. I've got so many questions, but why don't you just tell us why you're not voting for this?
Well, we can't afford it. Look, at some point, I realized we had spent more in Ukraine than we spend on all our roads and bridges in the United States. And I tweeted that. And Newsweek did a fact check on me. And what they found out is it was true. And, when you get the fact checkers to admit that a conservative, when they give them a mostly true rating, it's a metaphysical certainty. And since then, we've spent twice as much in Ukraine as we do on all of our roads and bridges federally in the United States. That is money that could have gone to double our infrastructure. Yet we're blowing up infrastructure that we're going to end up, I hate this, but they're going to tell us that we have to rebuild it when this is all over with.
The scale of this insanity is hard to digest. And I think whatever empire comes after ours will spend time studying it, what not to do. But you got to wonder, why is the leadership of your party, the Republican Party, in favor of this? Why the new speaker, who seems like a nice guy, but also like a child? Why would his first act as speaker be to endorse this? I'm confused.
Well, I hope he doesn't. But, Biden's budget director, the head of the OMB, sent a letter yesterday to Speaker Mike Johnson, imploring him to spend more money in Ukraine. And what they said is they want to revitalize our defense industrial base. That's the new acronym, DIB, for the MIC, the Military Industrial Complex. And they sent a list of states that would get money when we spend, money on deadly munitions, because they have to be manufactured in Alabama or Ohio or Texas. And so, they're saying the quiet part out loud, that congressmen tend to vote for this stuff because a lot of this federal spending that goes to Ukraine is actually laundered back to the military industrial complex. And in some ways, not very efficiently, but in some ways, it enriches people in their districts and the stockholders, some of whom are congressmen.
That's also grotesque, but it's also straightforward. People are getting rich, so let's do it. Okay, that's an argument. It's an immoral argument, but it is one. But that's not the argument they're making in public. They're saying we have a moral obligation. You're a bad person. You just heard the National Security Advisor say that you're a bad person if you're against this. But no one ever mentions that we have abetted the killing of an entire generation of Ukrainian men that will not be replaced to fight a war that they cannot win. They literally cannot win. We prevented a peace deal and we extended the war and we killed all these people. And so all the ones running around with their little Ukraine flag pins, they're implicated in that. Has anyone apologized?
No, to support this money, you have to be economically illiterate and morally deficient. Those are both conditions of voting for this. Because to say that we're going to grind down Russia, that we're going to deplete their own soldiers by expending the lives of Ukrainians, knowing that in the end, we're going to leave them holding the bag, that in the end, they can never prevail. They're not going to take back Crimea, even though we say that's one of the goals. when we can get them to state goals, which usually they won't. So it's morally reprehensible to say that you should fund this. And by the way, he says I'm a friend of Putin because I won't vote for this money. Well, I would say that I'm a friend of Americans and I'm putting America first. But he's part of, I would say, Putin's reelection campaign, because Putin is a Cold War relic that was elected in response to our Cold War relic, which is NATO. By expanding NATO, the neocons and the liberals, every time they push NATO closer to Russia, they help people like Putin get elected.
It's, outside our borders, it's very obvious that the whole world is resetting and that American influence is in very rapid decline, thanks in large part to this war in Ukraine, and that Russia is now joining this coalition, which will be the majority of the world's population and economy and military strength aligned against us. So this is resetting the world to our disadvantage. Again, leave the country. It's obvious your first day that this is happening very fast. Does anyone in Washington see that?
No, there are very few. I've been voting against these resolutions in Ukraine and the money going to Ukraine since 2014. In 2014, we helped to overthrow their elected government. And we were saber rattling against Russia. And I said, listen, these sanctions and this saber rattling and these resolutions, they're going to have consequences. And they have had consequences. Almost nobody in Washington, D.C. will admit this through their voting record. Now, they know it, but they won't admit it and they won't vote that way.
You often hear people say the news is full of lies.
Kennedy's motorcade.
239 people. The death of Jeffrey Epstein.